Hi everyone, today you're watching Man Carrying Thing. Today we're talking about books. So over 2 years ago now, I made a video where I discussed my 10 favorite books of all time. As I mentioned in that video, it's a changing list. I mean, it's more of a reflection of where you are in your life, and I think your favorite books and favorite anything, reflects who you are at that time. So it's interesting to see what I picked as my favorite books. Looking at it now, my tastes have changed quite a bit, but I'm excited to go through these with you. So, first but not least, and this is not in any order, East of Eden. I read this book when I was in high school, I think. I read it for fun, and that's the best way to experience any book you read in high school. I think for those who maybe were forced to read this, it's not as fun, but I think Steinbeck has a beautiful way with words. He's often compared to Ernest Hemingway, sometimes disparagingly because people say he's a lesser Hemingway, but that may be so. Hemingway certainly was probably more original for his time, but Steinbeck is still great, an amazing storyteller, and whenever I feel like I need to get back to my reading roots, I always pick up Steinbeck. So East of Eden is always there for me. Next up, this is certainly a very new edition, the Parker series. It's a series of like 24 books, I think, that were written from the 1960s up to like 2008. Richard Stark was a pseudonym for Donald E. Westlake, who was a crime writer. As Westlake, he wrote mostly comic crime fiction like The Hot Rock, but as Richard Stark, he got mean. His writing is very different as Richard Stark. It's lean, it's dry, it's simple, it's very brutal. The first novel in the series is called The Hunter, which has been adapted many times. Point Blank, Lee Marvin in the 60s. There was one, I think, with Mel Gibson later on. So the Parker series is legendary and beloved by so many crime fiction fans. I have a few favorites. I really love the Sour Lemon score. I love Plunder Squad, Slayground, the score. Slayground is great because Parker gets trapped in an amusement park and basically has to kill all these bad guys. The series gets ridiculous and strange because our main protagonist is a really horrible person. He is the bad guy. He's a criminal. He's a thief. Doesn't care about innocent casualties on the mission. He's all about being an effective, ruthless craftsman. He's skilled. He's all about professionalism, and that's what we love about him. That's why he's fun to watch, but he is basically a sociopath. You read The Hunter, and it's like reading Michael Myers if he was trying to rob a bank. So the purposes of the top 10, I wanted to find one Parker novel that best encompassed all of my favorite aspects of the Parker series, and for me, that book is the seventh. It is the seventh book in the series. Not all of them are titled like this. The book is less about the heist, in which they rob, I think, a college football game, back when, there was a lot more cash going around. Another fun thing about the Parker series is that it starts in the 60s, so there's a lot of plausible situations where they could rob places for cash, and it moves up into the 90s and the 2000s, in which case it's much harder to find cash, and it becomes so interesting because Parker as a character never ages. He's the same character the entire way through, but the world changes. It's fun to see the challenges that they face when there's CCTV everywhere. I always love when Parker gets wronged. When he gets angry and he has to hunt after the person who wrongs him. You can really read them in any order for the most part, except for Butcher's Moon. The seventh has some of Richard Stark's best writing. There's that perfect balance between spare and descriptive that I love so much. The way Stark describes killing a person in one of these scenes is just so amazing, how it dawns on this character. It was as though he had stabbed her from the rear observation platform of a train that now was rushing away up the track, and he could look out and see her way back there, receding, getting smaller and smaller, less and less important, less and less real. Time was rushing on now like that rushing train hurtling him away. That's what death is, getting your heel caught in a crack of time. I mean, come on. And this is like a slim little crime novel, but you have writing like that. Death is getting your heel caught in a crack of time. I mean, this stuff is just... I adore Richard Stark, Donald Westlake. Next up is another novel I read recently, and I'm not trying to say this is recency bias, but I truly think this is one of the best novels I've ever read in my life, and it's called Old Goriot, sometimes Pere Goriot, I don't know French, but it is a 19th century novel by the author Honoré de Balzac, part of his epic human comedy, which encompassed so many stories and novels. It's massive, and Balzac was famous for wanting to kind of chronicle the world scientifically in a way and kind of building this social structure. And he's kind of like developing early psychological realism before that was even a thing. So he's just an incredible writer. His characters are extraordinary. And reading him and reading about Paris in the 1830s, 1840s, like seeing yourself transported in time because it is so accurate. He, unlike a lot of novels from the first half of the 1800s, he focuses on the minutia, on the details, on the human stuff, on money, on how things cost, on social climbing, and I think he's relevant today now more than anything because he was describing a Paris in change, moving away from the Napoleonic era into this new industrialism and watching social climbers, watching people who were aristocrats, falling into poverty. And there's so much interest and like human comedy. That's a bad line. But old Goriot is like a perverse twist on King Lear, a doting father giving everything he can to his daughters and just living in poverty. This young up-and-comer rising through the social class, kind of crossing him as they're both going up and down. It's really tragic and funny, but also like sad and really upsetting in a lot of ways. But an incredible book. Just the characters will always stick with me, and I definitely plan to read more Balzac. I mean, who knew? Next up, and don't let the cover deceive you, this is a recent novel. I think it was published in 2022, 2023. It's called 5 Decembers, and it is a crime novel, but it is set around World War II, so it's kind of like a historical crime novel. This one so many awards when it came out. It is written in a very terse, almost Richard Stark style writing. An incredible mystery, but also an incredible love story. It is epic in so many ways. It kind of sweeps you off your feet. It sweeps you back into time. In fact, I've recommended this book so many times on this channel that I get comments frequently from people who have picked it up and read it, more than I think any other book I've ever recommended. And they've said, wow, you were right. That's actually a really good book. It is. I recommend it to everyone. It starts out as more of just a classic murder mystery. Detective on Hawaii, Pearl Harbor happens, and we're swept up into this massive tale. It's also like a breezy read. It's not like reading a massive tome. It is propulsive. Excellent story. Yeah, so one of my favorites of all time. Check it out. Next up, and this is something I read not too long ago, but it just became one of my favorites ever. I have this really nice Folio Society edition, but Wuthering Heights is either loved or hated by so many people. It's super divisive, and I see why. It's a dark novel. It's not as romantic as it is disturbing and weird. Very gothic. It is an epic in a lot of ways, and it reminds me a lot of East of Eden in that we're kind of following 2 or 3 generations of family members over time and seeing how their bad behavior affects the children and how that is passed on. And I mean, this book has blends of like Shakespeare in terms of the melodrama, in terms of it's like a cry out of hell. Some of these characters, the way they describe things, the way they go on and on about the miseries of their life, the way they hurt each other. Reading this and feeling like there's no way things could get worse. There's no way things could get worse. And it gets worse. I don't know why I thought it was going to be some kind of like really proper, Victorian novel. This book really goes all in. And I think that's why some people dislike it, because it might just be a little too much. It might be a little too dark. It might be a little too weird and out there. Like, these characters are so unlikable. Heathcliff is just one of the darkest characters in fiction. I mean, probably up there with Ahab. So it's a classic for a good reason. It feels very fresh. Read Wuthering Heights. So if you know me, you know I'd have to include a Faulkner title in this list. William Faulkner, one of my favorite writers of all time, a modernist, very, very influential, had an incredible run of very, very good novels. I had a few choices I could go with. I think on the first top 10 list, I went with Absalom, which is a great novel. People should read it, but maybe not as their first Faulkner. Then I thought maybe The Sound and the Fury, that's a good one. Light in August was my first real intro to Faulkner in terms of falling in love with his writing. But then I thought I should be talking about this other novel more, because I think way fewer people know about this. And it's one of his best books ever, period. And personally, it's probably tied with my favorite with Light in August and Absalom. And that book is The Hamlet. The Hamlet, not Hamlet, bears little resemblance to Hamlet. It is the first in his trilogy called the Snopes trilogy that follows a family, but really this character, Flem Snopes, who is sort of a demonic figure, insinuates himself into this small town and starts to take it over the decades, slowly. I think this book is so overwhelming and so powerful is because it strings together and brings together a lot of Faulkner's best short stories. It's not a short story collection. No. This is a novel, but it incorporates some of those stories and they're rewritten and reconfigured. And the story feels somewhat episodic. The effect is so powerful and overwhelming, and there's so much twisted gothic comedy and darkness in this book. I never knew Faulkner was funny until I read the Hamlet. Thought, oh, he's this grim, sad, depressing guy. No, he's weird. He's very weird. He brings together so many bizarre, surreal moments. A lot of people see Flem Snopes as kind of the embodiment of capitalism and kind of capitalism run amok, just taking over and consuming everything in its path without any sort of feeling or care for community, without any feeling or care for previous relationships. So while overall it is a tragic tale, the comedy is definitely there. So I recommend you read the Hamlet. So next on the list, of course, I have to talk about Moby Dick, one of the most experimental novels ever written, one of the best novels ever written. So much more than just a story of revenge, of madness. It really encompasses so much of what was going on in the 19th century America, about everything. I mean, it is at times Shakespearean, at times full of weird, dark comedy. Probably the American novel. Something I think everyone should try to read in their lives, and it is surprisingly readable. There are parts of this book that are just like whale facts, and it is a weird book, and then it'll go on these really discursive avenues. Just go with it. I do recommend picking up this version of the book or one that is similarly illustrated by Rockwell Kent. This is the classic Rockwell Kent illustrations. Reminder, Moby Dick was not successful when it came out. It really hit a resurgence, I think, in like the 1920s or 30s or 40s or something like that. But that's when people started to really reevaluate Moby Dick. I think because it was so far ahead of its time that it really picked up more with the modernists. Almost every page, I mean, not every page, but there's so many illustrations and they're beautiful and weird. And I love it so much. There's famously one whole chapter in here that just discusses the whiteness of the whale. It breaks into play, it breaks into song. It's very dynamic and strange. It's got everything. It's a great book. Read it. Next, I would like to discuss a classic of Latin American literature. This is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Apparently, Netflix is making an adaptation. I'm actually dreading that because I don't think this book could be adapted unless some visionary director wanted to do something crazy with it. But probably the prime example of magical realism, mixing fantasy with reality, very much addresses colonialism, the history of that, the history of capitalism invading Latin America. And I believe Marquez was a fan of Faulkner, and I think that Faulkner's blend of surrealism really influenced magical realism. You can definitely sense that there. The writing is beautiful. I've unfortunately only read it translated. I'm not good at Spanish enough, but the translation is incredible. It is long and it is kind of confusing. You definitely need to keep like a family tree chart because everyone has the same names, way too many similar names. But my God, the cumulative effect of reading it is extraordinary. So yeah, 100 Years of Solitude. No brainer. Next up, this is a collection of poems. He's my favorite poet of all time, Wallace Stevens. He was considered a modernist, I think, and worked at similar time as T.S. Eliot. There's some incredible long poems that he wrote, The Auroras of Autumn. I don't know why, of all the poets that I like, I always return to Wallace Stevens. I think there's just something there that is always elusive, that's always resisting interpretation and hard to grasp at, but there's something so profound and majestic and beautiful. The Idea of Order at Key West is one of my favorite poems. I feel like I had to include Wallace Stevens. I know most of these are novels, but I treat this book as essential, to everything. Been a part of my life for many years, and I always turn to it to get a sense of calm and perspective in life. His earlier poems are definitely more in the model of modernism. I think a lot of times you'll take a class and you'll learn about Wallace Stevens and you'll just cover his early poems because they are good examples of the kind of experimentation going on, the kind of breaks in style that was going on at the time. But I prefer his later poems, Auroras of Autumn, The Rock, very basic language to describe overwhelming feelings. A lot of his poems are about art, but they're also about the problem of trying to imagine anything. Do yourself a favor and just look up some of these poems. Finally, I have to mention Blood Meridian, and I have another fancy folio edition of this. I mean, it seems like it's having a renaissance, especially, unfortunately, after Cormac McCarthy's passing. But I think a lot of people are interested in it because it is challenging, because it's different and weird and disturbing. Yeah, that's important. I love the book's language. It is unlike any other book you're likely to read. And I love that people are drawn to reading it. It's something really special. It shows the West in a surreal way, but in a way that is more honest than a lot of Western media and novels and movies. The judge as a character is frightening, horrifying. It's funny that, this book isn't really a horror novel, but it has some of the most horrifying images and sequences I've ever read. The ending of the book, the last 100 pages are incredible. I kind of picked up Blood Meridian at a time when I wasn't reading a ton. I had, graduated high school. I was kind of not reading as much or as much challenging literature. And I picked this up and kind of went through it slowly. But by the time I got to the last 100 pages, I was swept up into it. I think it's incredibly rereadable because it's so dense. There's so much going on. Bizarre, arcane language, and it's beautiful. Nothing else really like this. And this was written in the 1980s. I think it's going to maintain its classic status for a long time. I think people will consider it Cormac McCarthy's best novel for a long time. If you read it, just be ready that it's not a thrill ride through and through. So I really love doing like bite-sized, like 15 minutes a day, I'd read Blood Meridian. And since doing that, I kind of like to take that approach with a lot of things that are hard or challenging or that I'm trying that are new, just a little bit at a time, and it feels like achievable. In the same ways I've been revisiting programming, trying to think in code again, revisiting some of those skills that I had once in college. If you're like me, you probably aren't just interested in reading, you're interested in learning all sorts of fields. Brilliant is where you learn by doing. With thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, Brilliant is a uniquely effective learning platform. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving, which is proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. All the content on Brilliant is made by an award-winning team of professionals, teachers, etc. from MIT, Caltech, Google. So what I like most about it, really, is that it's about problem solving, not memorizing useless information. And like I said, it works best for me because it can be done in like bite-sized little lessons, easily digestible, just a little every day. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in minutes a day with lessons you can do whenever you have time. Actually, the opposite of mindless scrolling. I've been diving into the programming courses. It's actually been really fun for me. It's like a routine I do whenever I have free time throughout the day. Brilliant's growing number of programming courses are a great way to build foundations and learn real-world applications. Get familiar with Python and build programs on day one with a built-in drag-and-drop editor. Learn essential coding elements from loops and variables to nesting and conditionals. Develop your mind to think like a programmer, building a strong foundation and writing robust programs. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/man-carrying-thing or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and thank you to you for watching it. And thank you to my patrons who are with me through thick and thin, and to everyone who watches and supports. It means a lot. I love to talk about books along with other things. Yeah, I hope this was fun. Bye-bye.